Okay, Jeremy, good afternoon. We're live. Thanks for joining me. Why don't you go ahead and just take the floor as brief as you can, introduce yourself to my audience so we can understand a little bit about your background and what you do.
Sure. My name is Jeremy Smith. I'm the president and founder of Launchpad. We are a Costco exclusive broker that works with food and beverage brands to help them gain access to Costco. Costco is much more of a specialty retailer in many ways in that they don't follow the grocery format. So brokers um, for Costco, including myself, are here to help clients access Costco more easily, um, cut through a lot of the red tape, and get them up and running, and help them understand some of the unique situations that exist at Costco. And if we do everything right, we can help a company, if we have the right item and the right group of people to work with. Sometimes we get incredibly lucky and we hit on a brand that generates 100 million at Costco, which is part of the reason a lot of brands go to Costco, is to get a boost in revenue that they wouldn't normally get at even a Walmart.
And what is different about Costco? You mentioned that they have a different process than traditional grocery stores or retailers. What makes Costco so special and different?
Well, it's really the volume and the consumer, that their member base is higher end, generally around 125,000 or more. From a demographic perspective, they're more the American Express customer than the Discover card, and they're looking for value with high quality and unique items, and so um, it presents itself in a way. I'm sure you've heard the term treasure hunt, but Costco is kind of the one really large retailer that gave a platform for emerging and smaller food and beverage brands, um, well ahead of what a Walmart would do or a Safeway would do. Now that's changed a bit in that more of the larger retailers are taking in brands earlier, but Costco overall, they pay on time. There's no distributors involved generally, unless it's a short shelf life product under 30 days. So it just prevents, it helps expand your business fairly quickly. And when you go into Costco, other retailers see it and then become interested in potentially bringing in your product.
And can you help me understand Costco's business model a bit? Because this may not be true, but I've heard that they break even on a lot of the products they sell. So if you're a food brand and you want to be placed in Costco, is it true that you said a boost in revenue, but does that not necessarily mean a boost in profit? Is Costco selling stuff at razor thin margins?
Yeah, the Costco business model is to create value. Um, they generally want to be 20% at cost, which is the FOB price that you would either sell directly to a retailer or a distributor. So if you're working with UNFI and they're your main distributor and they're getting the lowest price in the marketplace, and let's say they're $10, then Costco would need to be at 8 because they want a 20% discount for their volume advantages. So, and part of how you get there is you're going into a much larger pack. It's harder for newer brands or brands that are under 3 million a year in sales to get the economics and the some of the things in place that are necessary to service Costco in the beginning, because most brands, when you're small, you don't have as much pull with your co-packer or your ingredient suppliers as you will when you're a $10 million or $20 million company or more. So you have to always remember that Costco is a low margin business. You're generally going to be around somewhere between 8% and 15% on your margins at Costco. And since Costco needs to be there in order to provide the volume, you have to be able to get to those margins, because when you're just starting out, it doesn't always make sense to take on a large business that has incredibly low margins. So you have to look at your capital and where you are financing wise, because going in and the odds of getting into Costco on a regular basis where you're there every day is less than 1%. And so the question you have to ask yourself as owner of a brand or a founder or a leader of the company is, are you better off continuing down your path, increasing your distribution, keeping your expenses low, out in retail first, and then going to Costco at a later date when you're more profitable and you have more systems in place? Because a lot of the smaller emerging brands don't even have CFOs. So a lot, I've run into many situations where the brand doesn't even really have the ability to go in and do a full analysis of what the true costs are for them at a Costco. So you got to evaluate those things. As a broker, most brokers don't talk to the brands about profitability, but we do, because we think it's very important. We don't want our client to hit a home run at Costco and they're losing money.
We're talking about Costco business model, how they operate at low margins, how brands can get into Costco specifically. And I think we'd left off, you said less than 1% of brands remain in Costco for good. So as a brand, how do you stand out and become recognized by Costco and make it onto their shelves? It seems like it would be almost impossible to do, but it sounds like you help brands do it. So what's the key?
Well, the key is having the right product for the consumer base. And so sometimes it's just that simple, but the packaging has to be well designed so that the member that's walking by can understand in under 7 seconds what you're offering. There's two types of brands that go to Costco: newer brands that are looking to expand distribution, and then existing brands that are well known already and are trying to get placement there. And so it is really critical that you understand. It's also that you understand, what Costco is and what it isn't, and that they know in the first 2 weeks whether or not you have an item or not. If you're doing $400 a week and you're running demos, you're done. There's just no recovering from that. And you have to make sure you're in the right flavor for that brand, and you have to make sure that your distribution already exists outside of Costco. There's very few brands that go in with no distribution in a region and do really well. So, because Costco is basically a value sale, but, there's the master carton that most cell units sit in. And that gives you an additional opportunity to present your message. And it's just matching up correctly with the the demographics, and making sure you communicate your packaging in a way that is going to attract the brand. If you're trying to replace an existing item that's already successful, that's a much harder route to go down than if you're bringing in a product that is totally new to the category from the standpoint. And I don't mean that the brand is new, it's just newer in the marketplace. So there's some uniqueness. We have a term we use called DUE, D-U-E. It stands for disruptive, unique, and exclusive. And so there should be some exclusivity from your brand. There should be the potential for disruption, meaning that it will shake up the category. Like there's a Japanese barbecue sauce that went into Costco. They've got a nice style of design, and they've been a big hit. It's actually probably a fairly basic product in that you wouldn't think that off the top of your head that Japanese barbecue sauce would take off, but it really resonated with the members in that the packaging is kind of a throwback to the bottles that sit on tables, but theirs is in plastic. And it's kind of an old style look and feel, but it's also a very good sauce. And so they did a good job at communicating their message on their packaging, and it was attractive and clean. And the members have just really embraced it. So there's those type of items that come out of nowhere and take off, but those are very rare. Everyone hears the story and thinks they can do it, but most just don't have the pull in the marketplace. And as I said earlier, it's really important that you go into Costco with outside distribution being strong in the Costco region that you're going into. Because Costco has two buying groups. They have corporate, which you have to be large enough to support the sales nationally, because Costco doesn't want to be more than 25% of your business. And if you're only doing 5 million or 10 million, odds are you're not going to hit that number at corporate, because they want to do 50 million or more. But they have 8 regional US offices, and then offices in Canada and all over the world now as they move into China. But the regional offices generally allow you to go test your brand. You can go into one building, or you can go into 50 buildings. You don't generally get to pick that. But if you go to Costco, they're one of the few brands that will bring items into 3 or 4 buildings, so that you can grow with Costco. And as long as you hit the numbers, you're probably in a pretty good position to slowly build your business and have controlled growth, which I use that word a lot because growth doesn't really mean anything anymore. It's kind of a bland term. There's all different types of growth. So, but controlled growth allows you to manage your margins better than just growth for the sake of trying to get into a whole bunch of doors. And so you want to have the strongest opportunity velocity wise at Costco, so that your numbers track higher.
Can you maybe expand on that a bit? Because I would imagine in creating a food product, one of the biggest challenges is managing inventory and scale, and dealing with the marginal cost of the packaging and the actual food itself, right? Which seems like it would be hard to grow. As you grow, those costs increase and you need more cash to create more of the food product. I mean, how does, as a someone, an entrepreneur in that space, how do you manage that, knowing that growing is going to increase costs exponentially? How can you grow
Well,
sustainably, as you just mentioned?
I mean, that's where it's really all over the place because it depends a lot on what type of experience the team that's running the brand has. Again, I pointed out earlier that a lot of these smaller brands don't have a CFO. They're using Quicken maybe or some other software. And so they often get into financial trouble because they don't have the knowledge internally to truly measure what their margins are. And a lot of assumptions get made. And many times they're wrong. And so that's another factor that we, sit down and talk to our clients about. Um, they always say that they can pay for the demos, but that run at Costco. But then sometimes they can't cash flow it, that the co-packer wanted more money up front. So what we do is we really talk to our clients about slowing the process down, meaning spend the right amount of time truly analyzing your numbers and seeing at what point it truly financially makes sense to try and launch at Costco instead of just focusing on, well, if we go to Costco, we'll get a $300,000 order. And that's all that they really focus on many times. And it's important to understand everything that you do in your business has a cost. And once the money's spent, the cash comes out of your bank account and it's gone. And so you have to make sure that you're getting the right margins in place so that uh, you can afford to pay the co-packer who wants their money up front. You can afford to pay for the demos at Costco as they want their money up front. So um, even though Costco allows you to build up to 10% of your demo cost into the cost of goods, you're still going to have to front load that money out, and there's a cost to doing that. And so you've got to internally um, manage that in addition to packaging costs that you'll have for a larger size package, because you've got to have channel separation. You don't want to be selling the same pack that you sell to Whole Foods to Costco, because that'll create a channel conflict.
Mhm. Is there a specific margin or a general rule of thumb for products or customers that you work with, where you say, hey, you need a margin of X% to be able to go into Costco, or is it not that cut and dry?
Well, it depends on the category, because some categories have a little bit more room on the margins, not for what Costco charges margin wise, but Costco doesn't just look at the 20% value at cost. You could come into Costco with a 20% value at cost. And again, I want to point out, this is not the price the consumer sees. This is the FOB price compared to your distributor, or if you're selling directly to a retailer. Um, Generally, the margin the consumer is going to see is a savings of around 48 to 55%, depending upon the item. But that's not what the buyers focus on. They focus more on the value at cost. So you've got to look at all of those things. Now, then the last thing they look at is, what is the margin or the value compared to the category? So you could be, let's just say you're an ice cream and you're going a keto ice cream and you're going into Costco, and you've got the right value at cost in place, the right value at retail, but the competitor that's already in there has an even better value than you have, Costco's going to look at that, because if your competitor's at 33 cents an ounce and you're at 36 cents an ounce, Costco's not going to just pay you the 36 cents an ounce. They're going to want to know why you're more expensive. Now, Costco, it could be in this case, you have more butter than the competitor has, or you're using better ingredients than someone else. And those are things you can justify. But you can't just walk into Costco and say, this is my best price, and expect Costco to accept it like a grocer would. Costco is very analytical. It's more of an operational sell than a true sell that when you go into a different retailer, they're not going to ask you maybe, what percentage of milk to salt to quinoa is being used in the product. And so you've got to take all those factors in the competitive set, because you're competing with these products for space. And so sometimes a higher cost per ounce is easy to justify, but you can't just go in and say, oh, I'm a premium brand, ha ha ha, you have to pay the higher price. You've got to be able to justify it. That's why I say it's more of an operational sale, because Costco is going to look at how many units you have on the pallet. Is it too many? Is it too little? By adding another 176 units to the pallet, can you save another 4 or 5%? So those are things that we counsel our clients on in advance, so that we take care of all of that before the buyer's meeting.
Is there, generally speaking, recommended categories? If someone said, hey, I want to go into this space, I want to create a food product, where you'd say, okay, well, I would avoid the energy drink space or the soda space, but I'd recommend the snack space or the ice cream space, like you talked about. Do you differentiate that, or are they all relatively ultra competitive? I would imagine that there's so many food options and offerings in Costco and normal grocery stores. I mean, how do you decipher which space to enter if you want to enter the space as an entrepreneur or a new brand?
Well, we look at it from the perspective that you have to understand the competitive set no matter what. So if you go into a Costco, you'll see like the bar set is relatively small compared to the snack set. So there's more opportunities in the snack set in many ways than almost any other category, because it's such a big category. So you have to look at all of those things, because it's much more challenging to get into a limited SKU space. So like if you look at coffee is one of those categories that's dominated mostly by Starbucks and Costco's house brand, which is Kirkland's Signature. So that's a unique situation, because Costco doesn't necessarily want to bring in brands that are going to compete with their private labels. It just doesn't make sense. And Costco's private labels brands are generally outdrawing revenue-wise the branded products. So like in the bar category, Costco now dominates the bar category. So with their Kirkland Signature brand, they've taken a lot of business away from the other brands. Now, that's where the whole DUE process comes in. DUE is if you come in with a product that's truly unique but is not a niche product, you may have an opportunity because you're so different than what Costco's carrying in that category. But when people call me in the chip category for puff products don't really sell that well at Costco for whatever reason, other than the veggie straws, which are not technically puff, but they're somewhat similar. They do very well, but a lot of the puff products just come as in and outs or rotational items. They just don't do the numbers that a tortilla or a potato chip will do. So you've got to factor all of those things, and that's part of our role. And whether you hire us or you hire another broker, they should be capable of helping you understand that and help you analyze that. And then lastly, it comes down to how you present your brand. What is your story? Do you have a sustainable story? Do is there something special that you guys do to with your ingredient suppliers to make sure that they're not using palm oil, or they're not using high fructose corn syrup, or ingredients that Costco um, doesn't generally approve. So, there's a lot of technical work that has to go on. Some brokers are really good at it, like us, and others just don't pay any attention to it, and it's a longer process. Generally, you have to expect it's going to take you around 14 to 15 months to get into Costco, just because they don't add SKUs, they take out SKUs. So if you're going to go in, you're going to replace some product is going to get pulled out in the category to make room for you to be tested. So you've got to, again, I go back to truly understand your category so that you kind of in your mind feel like which products you're going to be competing against most, and tailor your presentation to that. But Costco doesn't really want to get involved with all the Nielsen data and IRI data. They're more focused on, are these good people that are running the company? Do they have integrity and the right values? And they'll spend a lot of time on that if they're interested in your item, and they'll want to meet the founders of the company. Generally, you don't want to just send the broker. The founder of the company or the VP of sales should be there. And it's, I always tell people, it's not, that play and movie Glengarry Glen Ross, where you bring in some hotshot salesman like the main character in the movie, and they talk about how great they are, and we're doing this and we're doing that. That's not what they want to hear about. They want to get to know the brand and feel like, is this a brand our members can embrace and get behind? And is there integrity behind the group? Because there's a lot of people that aren't truthful, or have a tendency to exaggerate about the quality of their product. And Costco's always watching out for that type of stuff. And generally, they don't like snazzy salespeople that just talk the entire meeting and don't listen to the buyer. So and they want to make sure that you're prepared when you come in. Some companies call me and they go, well, we'll just work with the buyer and let them determine, what size they want to do and all that other stuff. And there's a lot of weakness to that, because you should know more about your own business and your product than Costco does. And so you want to make sure that you're developing the product that you think is going to be successful, because there's so many brands that come to us that went into Costco and they failed. And a lot of it had to do with, they let the buyer drive everything, even though they knew it was a unique flavor, but that uniqueness wasn't a strength. It was a weakness because it didn't appeal to enough members. So, that's what I say when there's a lot of unique processes at Costco and thinking that goes on. And the buyers are incredibly smart at Costco, and they understand their business, and are really focused on, these type of things, and will often bring them up at the meeting. So you need to be prepared. And if you don't know an answer, you shouldn't try and, it's not a weakness to not know something. It's a weakness when you go out and lie about something or distort it because you don't know and you just guess at it. And you're always better off in coming back later with a response, or I'll get back to you. And as long as you get back to them very quickly, then the process keeps moving forward.
I'm curious, do you have insight into Costco's top selling products if we look back at 2023 or maybe even 2022 if the 2023 data is not available?
Some, Costco is very guarded about their data. It's not, they don't really share with you what's going on they may say, hey, this brand is doing incredibly well, but they know a lot of times if they do tell you that brands take advantage of it and go talk about it publicly to other partners in the thing, and then it gets around, so Costco kind of stays guarded to that, but we kind of know. A lot of times they'll tell us, well, the leading item in this category is doing $30,000 a week, and so you pretty much know who they're talking about without having to name the brand. So and then other times they'll be very honest with you and tell you, hey, Chobani is killing it and they're doing blah, blah, blah per week. And that's a number you're going to have to hit. Like, and this is one of the differences is that, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the yogurt category did well for Costco, but now the numbers are double what they used to be back then as to what you have to hit in order sales wise per week per warehouse than you did previously. So it's important to have those discussions with the buyer from a target perspective so that you understand you need to do this amount of dollars in sales per week per warehouse, because you want to know what your target is for what the buyer's thinking and what they're looking at and how they're going to evaluate it. So you might think you do really well at $1,500 a week, but the buyer's perspective may be that you need to be at $2,200 a week. So it's always important to understand those things. And then you get into support. Demos to me are still the best value. Coupons, which a lot of buyers like because they do drive sales, they don't drive loyalty. And that's sometimes brands don't understand it. There's a big difference between loyalty to a brand and buying members purchasing more when it's on sale versus just members that just buy when something's on a discount because they don't come back to the brand once it's, let's say it's $3 off. They're just shopping. They're cheap members and they're just shopping for the lowest price.
What about, are you able to pretty easily break down like percent of revenue from different categories in Costco? I'm just curious how it breaks down. Like you mentioned, alcohol, meat, dairy, snacks, non-food items. Is there a specific category that drives the bulk of their revenue?
There are, but it's more complicated than that because you've got corporate items and then you've got regional items. Generally the chip category drives a lot because there's a lot of promotion around it, and there's more events. Like when you get near the barbecue season with meats, that sales are going to go up. That around the Super Bowl, sales are going to go up on chip items. And there's certain times of the year where certain items like muesli or granola don't sell as well. Like when it's 102 outside, people aren't necessarily running out and wolfing down muesli. So you've got to be aware of all of those things. But the Kirkland signature items drive a bulk of the business. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
But as the company's grown, it's the Kirkland Signature private label brand has become a bigger part of Costco's business, and they've taken advantage of that. And so you always have to be aware of that if you're going into a category where the main competitor is a private label brand. That can be problematic because they generally don't like to compete against the private label except with a major national brand, because then they can show what a great value. Like in the detergent category, they like having other brands next to the Kirkland Signature brand because it's usually half the price of the branded product. So that's a more unique situation. But you're not gonna, no matter what you think, you're not gonna outsell Coca-Cola or Pepsi, but on the beverage side. But you may do well enough, like the kombucha category is they've done well with it, but it's very small. There's usually only 2 or 3 brands in there. Now you go into a supermarket and there might be 23 kombucha brands, but that's not Costco's model.
Got it. I want to shift a little bit. Before we started recording, I think you had mentioned that you've worked with some pretty top-notch brands like Chobani, I think you brought up earlier, or Bob's Red Mill. I'm curious, as a broker, as a marketer yourself, what the keys to success or why these brands are so successful when so many other consumer goods or food products fail, but yet, Chobani stands at the top of yogurt, Bob's Red Mill stands at the top of flour and raw ingredients, and if there's anything, maybe those two or others that you're aware of that they do well that others don't, that have led to their sustained success and growth.
Well, Chobani was a unique company. People often refer to it as a unicorn brand, but they were very driven in a way that I've seen in very few, even successful brands. And they have the ability to execute at a very high percentage on their goals. And they were not distracted by buyers that wanted them to create other products. They were focused on their core items for this first 4 to 5 years, and then they began expanding out. But most of it is executing on the business plan. And of course, there's marketing. Marketing is, and packaging design and all that stuff, and the messaging to the consumer is vitally important. But these type of brands that, like Bob's Red Mill is unique in that it's almost a brand and an icon, kind of like Colonel Sanders was for Kentucky Fried Chicken. There's Bob's Red Mill, the brand, and then there's Bob Moore, who started the company, who's legendary and is loved. I mean, just loved by consumers because he's very authentic. He's not a bullshitter. He's in many ways, he's a true American hero in the food business because he held to his values, and values are very important to him. And he built a company around those values. And you can go in and talk marketing speak all you want, but in the end, when the rubber meets the road, you have to be real. And many brands spend a lot of money on marketing and don't execute on the authenticity so that the consumer feels like, wow, they share my values. So those are important things. I also think with somebody like a Chobani or a Crave, Crave opened up the jerky category to women, which up until that point was a very small part of the growth in jerky. And by developing the soft jerky instead of the yank and pull, the hard jerky that most people were accustomed to. Crave had a unique taste profile and had flavors that nobody had added to jerky before. And so that in itself and John Sebastiani's drive and innovation set them apart from the rest of the stodgy old brands that existed in the category. And, all of them, what most companies, if there's one thing companies struggle with, it's authenticity and execution. And the successful companies always have the ability to execute consistently, and it's in their blood. I mean, it's and you can feel it. Building momentum for a brand out in retail is vital. And like Dave's Killer Bread is another example of a brand that really came out of nowhere and caught on. And they were another Portland, Milwaukee area brand up here in Oregon. And, it just resonated really well with consumers, and their messaging was good, and the product was excellent and of good quality. And members felt like they were getting something they didn't get with the competition. And so those things are always important. And then when you look at the companies that stumble or get passed by these brands, you'll always see something was missing there. They didn't have a good innovation team. They didn't have the vision to develop items that really excited the consumer. And so when you put all of those things together, that's really the make it or break it attributes that these brands have that the other brands don't have. And
I think that makes, yeah.
It's not all about size and how big the company is, because there's a lot of smaller brands that do really well. It's like, I always look at the restaurant business because, there's big chains that bring in billions of dollars. And then a lot of times there's the real love and passion that the consumers have that go to the restaurants are for the smaller restaurant with the lesser named chef that's up and coming, but they create an experience that's different than what the larger successful restaurants have, and they become within their community a very strong restaurant within wherever the community is, whether it's New York or whether it's Biloxi, Mississippi. There's this place out in Arkansas, a restaurant called Doe's, and they're well known because they smoke their meats, and they have incredible biscuits and huge steaks, and but they've developed that following that other brands just don't always develop.
And so to kind of wrap up, and then I want to pivot to you as an entrepreneur and how you kind of got to where you are in your journey. But I'm curious of the brands you work with, or what the typical path is it, or the end goal for somebody creating a food brand. Is it typically acquisition, or you just kind of talked about having a more niche product with smaller consumption or revenue goals and kind of maintaining it that way? Is there something that you see that's more common than the other that you recommend? I know it's pretty standard for Coke or Pepsi to gobble up and acquire an up and coming beverage brand. I mean, is that fair to say across the food and beverage space?
Yeah, I mean, the acquisition has slowed down somewhat, but I think some of the challenges with the acquisitions are that most emerging food and beverage brands think differently than a Coca-Cola. And it's very hard. These big brands, Coke, Pepsi, Kraft, they're learning that when they acquire the brands, they these cultures, which the consumers are really behind, don't match up well with Pepsi or Kraft. And a lot of times they destroy the brand. So we saw this with Honest Tea and that getting shut down, and a few other brands here or there. Hershey's just couldn't do anything with Crave. And so from an acquisition and if you're a $5 or $10 billion company, even if, let's say, you're brand A at 60 million a year, that's nothing. That's not even a rounding error at Coca-Cola. So a lot of those brands don't contribute very much to the bottom line. Then you've got something like Stacy's Pita Chips, which was probably one of the best examples of a brand. It was a perfect match for Frito-Lay Pepsi because they needed more distribution, and Pepsi had, Frito-Lay has the trucks they can put their snacks on and just overnight triple the distribution. And that was a great fit. They also did something that I think is really important. They being Frito-Lay kept Stacy on so that that culture and that innovation that doesn't necessarily happen at Frito-Lay Stacy's would maintain that. And I think that was one of the more successful acquisitions because it wound up being a win-win for Stacy's and a win-win for Frito-Lay Pepsi. So it can happen. It can be successful, but this idea that emerging brands are going to contribute a ton of growth to a $3 to $5 billion company got exaggerated by idiot analysts in the at the Morgan Stanleys and the Goldman Sachs that thought Stacy's could become a $1 billion brand. But it's become a much larger brand and a more successful and available brand, and they've done a damn good job with it. And those are the ones that are more successful when the values of both companies, while different, come together and can coexist. And if managed properly, can find their path forward in a way that other companies fail with. So that's my kind of take on that with the acquisition side.
Well, and maybe to round this out, should it be a goal of an emerging brand to be acquired, or do you recommend trying to sustain on your own?
Yeah, the brand should be built to last, not built to flip. And most of the companies that have tried to go down we're going to build it into a blah, blah, blah and flip it have failed. They haven't pulled off a major success. I'm not saying there aren't successes, but it just nothing goes exactly how you plan in business. And so sometimes you hit your goals, sometimes you don't hit your goals. Sometimes your assumptions are incorrect and you try and envision something and you're unable to execute. So you have to build a company so that it can stand on its own 2 feet. And if an acquisition happens, if you build it right, you will get more money for the acquisition. If you go in, and I've heard entrepreneurs at events talk about, well, we're going to flip it in 3 years. Right then and there, that's a loser to me. That's somebody who doesn't care about their business and doesn't have a heart or passion. They're just about the money. And when you're all about just one thing, you generally don't find the success. It's kind of an unrealistic expectation. When Crave got bought, because this is a good point you brought up, all the jerky competitors we're talking about. We're going to be the next Crave, which that's a stupid comparison. First of all, you're not John Sebastiani. You don't think like John Sebastiani. And none of them emerged out of the whole rush to acquire jerky companies with winners. I mean, none of them really blew up into big brands. Only, so it was kind of like the big magic numbers that were paid by Hershey's for Crave just never materialized for the other brands.
Mm-hmm.
And many of them went bankrupt.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and maybe we can get into kind of your philosophies too, and this will maybe come up again. Maybe it's a sustainability mindset or viewpoint, but I'm curious how, if you look back on your career today, how you ended up where you are today. I don't know if you were young and you said, "Hey, I'm going to go into branding and marketing and consumer products," or I'm always curious to learn how people kind of fell into the career that they fell into. And then also for you, why you chose to say, I'm going to be the CEO and founder of Launchpad, why you chose that ownership, that founder path.
Well, I'll start with the founder path first, because if you pay attention to your gut, you can learn a lot more than being forced into something. Generally, the answers come to you. It's a spiritual or philosophical approach that if you give yourself time and you're open to really listening, your views will change over time and you'll grow and you'll come to the realization there are people. That's why I always say entrepreneurs are not teachable, really. You either have it in you or you don't have it in you. I always butted head with management, and I am an outspoken person. So a lot of companies that I worked at were like, they didn't want to hear that. Like if I said, well, you're not going to be successful because the VP of sales doesn't know what he's doing and how he's handling this client, and you're not going to close it. And, and then the president of the company took me aside and said, you can't say that in a meeting, blah, 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 blah. And then, so in my mind, I started saying, no, why can't you say that in a meeting? So I was working for a company that was in the advertising business for many years. And one day the CEO took me to lunch and he said, it's time for you to leave. And I said, what? What do you mean it's time for? I like it here. And he said, no, he said, you're still young and you're still learning, but you really need to start your own company, because he says, I know what an entrepreneur is. And he said, you just, in your gut, you can't keep your mouth shut. He said, you need to go out and prove to yourself that either A, you can be an entrepreneur and start your own company, or C, that it's not the right fit. But he said, I think you'll find out that it's something you love because you're willing to take the chances and put up the money and do what you need to do to be successful. And turned out he was right. And it's not that I don't like being told no by other people. I just have a way I like to work, and it doesn't necessarily fit into the corporate world. And so from my perspective, I can't work for somebody else. I can work with people, but I can't work for somebody else. I need to have my own business. And so my brother and I started a brokerage firm. He used to work for Costco, and he invited me to join him, and we were very successful and sold the company. And I wasn't ready to retire. And so in 2017, I started Launchpad. And I didn't want to be like our previous company, Level One Marketing. I wanted this to be really small and only work with 5 to 10 clients a year, and that's what we do. And I'm at a stage in my life where I take a lot of time off anyway. So, but it's just a different model, and we're able to really service the clients. And the other thing is, I don't want to represent brands that aren't trying to make the world or the food system better for people. Like we used to represent 5 Hour Energy, and they're really good people, but I don't want to create products that aren't healthy for consumers. And I'm willing to give up that money because I, cashed out in the sale of the last company, and I hold to my values, and I don't want to represent brands that are making products that, consumers may love, but they're very unhealthy heart wise, for your body. And I want to work with people that share these type of values. And so it's been very rewarding as I bring my career soon to a close because I'm getting older. And, but it's been an interesting ride that I'll never forget.
Yeah, it sounds like a great career. I want to back up a bit, a couple questions kind of coming out of that. But did you know that you had that entrepreneurial sense before that CEO pulled you aside, said, "Hey, you need to get out of here"? And if so, what was holding you back? Why didn't you take the step on your own and say, "Okay, I'm on my own accord. I'm gonna decide to start a company," as opposed to kind of getting that permission from the CEO?
Well, that's a good question with a complicated answer, I guess. But it's there. You have to be comfortable with this idea to dream big and then execute on it. And it's kind of a weird thing when you start saying to yourself, you know what, I can do this as well as blah 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 does it. Um, and it's scary because you're out there without a parachute and the plane, and you're getting pushed out the door. Um, you just have to have a sense of confidence and belief in yourself without the arrogance. And it's scary in the beginning. It's scary as hell. It's your own money that you're putting on the line now, which, it's why most people don't become an entrepreneur or try to, because it's a lot of people like the safety of a 9 to 5 job, and they're not, some aren't big thinkers, but others are big thinkers, but they know entrepreneurship isn't for them. And a lot of it came from working with other entrepreneurs. Like I've worked with some of the best creative people in the design world on the West Coast that have ever existed, like Keith Bright and Jennifer Morla, and people like that who do incredible or did incredible work. And so you begin to see their styles when you're working with them and how they have defined entrepreneurship for them. And there's a certain freedom to it. It's very risky, but you also have to look at the risk as an opportunity and not necessarily a risk. And you have to be willing to fail. I think that was one of the biggest lessons I learned, is that failure is okay as long as you learn from it. And, it's kind of like speaking in public. I used to get really nervous. And when I was in high school, one of my teachers said to me, well, he said, you're always going to be speaking in front of other people, maybe groups as small as 8 people at a company, or, at a board meeting or whatever. And, the more you practice this, the more, the less nervous you'll be. And it was that was very true. And once you become okay with the idea of failing or not doing as well as you hope, that's actually okay, you can begin to, the fear sort of goes to the back. It's always there nagging at you. But you also have to be able to overcome self doubt. Everyone that's in a business, whether you're working in the mailroom or you're working, I get they probably don't have mailrooms anymore, but um, or you're at the top of the executive chain, has some self doubt at times, and it's how you deal with that knowledge. And you know, it's always like, how do you deal with failure? Do you bounce back from it quickly? Do you go, okay, I should have turned right, I knew it, blah 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 blah. It's how you deal with all of these things that, and when you hear no, you don't look at it as, oh my God, I failed. Walmart said no to me. Um, it's more being reflective and saying, Walmart said no to me now. They'll say yes to me at some other point. And then, you still have to, the hardest part is, I think, learning how to build a team. That's the thing that I learned, is that's probably the biggest challenge that I've ever had, is hiring the right people and building that team, because no one man or woman can, although Elon Musk thinks he can do all of it himself. Um, Steve Jobs used to say, well, we need certain teams, and that are good at executing on this. And while team C may not be as good as team A, they're very good at this. And together, A, B, and C teams bring the success to the company, because they all know what their roles are, as long as they're clearly defined. So those are all important factors that go into it. But, my brother and I, when we started Level One, um, we just work really well together. And so, where he was strong, I might have some weaknesses there. So he compensated for what I didn't have, and I think I compensated for what he didn't have. Although I doubt he'll admit that he had anything he needed to compensate for, because he's a prickly little fellow. So, but he's very good at what he does. He's better at operational. I'm better at sales and marketing. And so when you bring someone who's really strong operationally together, and I'm not saying I'm Steve Jobs, but the thing that made Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak so successful is you had the brilliant mind of Steve Jobs. Again, I'm not Steve Jobs. Um, Steve Jobs had the marketing and sales, and Wozniak had the technology. And together, they made probably the best team in the history of business.
Mm-hmm.
And wasn't perfect, but they had all the tools together with the right employees, and they were very successful. And so, as long as you build the right supporting cast around yourself, it enables you to find that entrepreneurial spirit. But you don't think about it like, oh, I want to become an entrepreneur. You do kind of fall into it, whatever the circumstances are, whatever the timing is, whenever the moment is right. And I mean, I started a very successful company. When Jonathan and I started Level One, it was around when President Obama was just elected, and the economy was just, we had the mortgage crisis. It wouldn't sound like the best time to start a company, but it was. The stock market crashed. And in the end, it all came together and worked. And sometimes, if you had looked at it, you would say, oh, no, I don't want to start a business right now. But it wound up being the perfect time.
No, a lot of good advice there. couple questions off of that, especially as you're kind of considering retirement, or you've talked about how you take a lot of time off now and you're kind of in the twilight of your career. As you look back, do you regret anything? And then secondly, what advice would you give to your younger self, maybe just as you're graduating college or entering the workforce?
Take more, to my younger self, take more chances, believe in yourself more. Um, Most important thing though is to take the opportunity before you do the entrepreneurship to understand yourself, and to build the right plan around it if you're going to go out on your own, but also to take jobs so that you can learn. Like, one of the things I did when I was working for the gentleman, whose name is Drew Andreessen, was I needed to learn every aspect of his business in order to start my own. That was one of the things I figured out. So I hung out in the accounting department when I had extra time, talking to the CFO, what his thoughts were. I took him to lunch and asked him questions about, what is it that you struggle with? What does a company need? And then, I even talked to the messengers and the drivers who worked for our company on how they, succeed out there with so much traffic in LA. And so I wanted to understand how what every department's role was in the company and how they succeeded and what their biggest challenges were, because I wanted to be educated. I didn't go to college, so for me, but I always read, so I was well educated. But I really focused on these departments because here's an existing model within the company I was currently working for that was perfect to learn why marketing does what they do. And as you learn about all these things, it becomes a compilation of, um, it's almost like an opera where you have a conductor, you've got each piece of it, it's complicated, but it all comes together. And so if you take the time to learn these things instead of rushing out right away, you accelerate the rate of knowledge, because there's that old saying, knowledge is power, and I don't believe in that. I believe that knowledge is only powerful when you figure out what to do with the knowledge, because that will determine whether or not it's of value. And so you you know you're never going to know everything. That's okay. You don't have to know everything. You can go to college, you don't have to go to college. This idea that you have to go to college to be successful is a lie. Um, Now, if you're going to be a doctor, you got to go to college. But if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you don't necessarily have to go to college. I think an MBA is a total waste of money. They're some of the least competent people I've ever met in an organization are MBAs. And I agree with Elon Musk. I wouldn't hire one in my company. But because they're all based on theory, they're not based on real world stuff. And I've seen a lot of them work. And they don't have I don't want to say that they all are this way, but a lot of them don't have common sense because they've never had the experience of actually working in an organization. And they don't know what the variables are, as to where I've had the experience and seen some of the most expensive products launches become disasters. And you just have to come up with your plan and then go for it. If an entrepreneur path is where you go, but there's nothing wrong with not going down that path either.
Yeah, I like that the introspection and You make an interesting point about college. I don't know if you want to expand on that any further. I don't, and it's probably hard to make a blanket statement, but for young people today that may be considering going to a university and taking on massive amounts of debt as opposed to just entering the workforce and taking a sales position or whatever it is. I mean, do you have a recommendation? Is it hey, forego college? You don't want to put yourself $80,000 in debt. You can get a lot of experience by just the real world. Is that fair, or is it hard to say without understanding further
Well,
circumstances?
I'm biased. I went down the path of not going to college for some of those very reasons. My mom had passed away. My mom and dad were also divorced, so my dad didn't want to pay for our college as kids, and so I was in a tough spot financially, so I went to work. But to me, college is more about learning theories than it is about truly learning real world experiences. And so, working with some of the best designers in the world, I learned all different types of visions that they have for the creative process. And I think too many CEOs don't understand creative, so they don't value it and they don't understand marketing. And part of that is because you don't really get taught that in college the same way you do when you're in a company. And so I think, I could tell you, as I said, you don't need to go to college unless you want to be a doctor or a lawyer, but it has to be right for who you are. And, there's a lot of very successful people who didn't go to college. And I think companies are finally starting to reevaluate whether a degree is a necessary requirement for someone to come work for you. Um, you know, and college again is a lot about theories, and until you go out and prove these theories either right or wrong, I mean, who are these professors? What are their work experiences? What do they know about running a company? Yet they're teaching economics. Again, theories. Some people agree with trickle down. Some people don't agree with trickle down. I don't believe in trickle down. I don't think anything ever trickles down. So, other than rainwater, but you know, we get caught up in these tales. Oh, go off to college and become a blah blah blah. But some of the best people I've ever known are people who've worked in automotive manufacturing plants and shoe factories, and they're just as smart as the people who went to college. Maybe not as book smart, but they're more than capable of doing the work that's out there and beyond that. But it has to be right for you. Part of the problem is that parents have this, their own beliefs about what their kids should do, and they have sometimes too much influence, um, or try to exert too much influence on what the kid should do. How can you know at 19 or 20 years old what you want to do? I mean, until you go do it, then you go, now, you know what? I don't want to do this. I want to do this. I
Mm-hmm.
had a friend who was in marketing and went to college. He graduated, did the whole spiel. And all he really wanted to be was a chef. And at 54, quit his marketing job, took a massive pay cut because he was making about 150, 180 a year, and went into a restaurant in San Francisco and got a $10 an hour job on the late shift working in a restaurant, and then became a chef and then owned his own restaurant. And couldn't have been happier that he made the move. His wife divorced him over it, but it couldn't be a happier guy. And so you don't. I had you said earlier, how'd you know you want to do? I had no idea I wanted to be in the food or beverage business, but I had done enough things to where I knew I wanted to work with my brother. And so here was this opportunity, and I knew I could do it. And so that's how that all came together. And then, Launchpad, I just wanted to do something unique and different and have fun. That was the main thing, was to have fun. Create wealth for people, but also work with people that you can really truly respect and be happy that you made them a lot of money. So,
Yeah. I think a lot of good points there. And a lot, when you're making a decision whether you should be an entrepreneur, whether you should go to college, or whether you should take a certain career, it's a lot of introspection and intention, and taking the time to think through it. So I think those are really good points. But I'm going to kind of guide us to a close here, and I'm going to give you the floor. If you have any final thoughts, either about your company or maybe for anybody listening to this that is considering starting a brand or a company. So I'll give you the floor to close this out, and where people can find you and contact you as well. And I appreciate you taking the time again, Jeremy. It's been a pleasure.
thank you. The last thing I would add is, don't do what other people want you to do. Do what you want to do with your life. Life's very short. 15 minutes ago, I was 21 years old. Now I'm going to be 65 in April. It goes by so fast. And the last thing you want to do is choose a career that you just are miserable about. And then the last thing I'll add on to that is, nothing's more important than the family that you decide to create, not your job, not your boss. Don't necessarily love your job, really like what you do, but save love for your family. And I think that would probably be, I hate to say I have a regret, but my one regret was that I put too much into my job and not enough into my family. Fortunately, my kids have given me an opportunity to re-enter their lives and spend a lot of time with them. Otherwise, I would have a huge regret.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really important to remember that family is first beyond any business goal or dream or aspiration. That family is really the foundation for success.
I think that's a great way to end it. A great reminder that people forget sometimes. So, again, thanks for taking the time, Jeremy. If you're okay with it, I'll also put your LinkedIn profile in the description, as well as the website to your company, so people can
Sure.
find you and reach out to you and connect. But again, thank you for taking the time. I enjoyed it.
And thanks for giving me the opportunity.